All right, we're live. Welcome everybody to Progress in Action. I'm Prophet, and I'm here with a great leader, youth activist in the AV, Assembly Delegate Giovanni Pope. Welcome, and it's really awesome to have you with us. I've loved your politics, and I've seen you speak, and you're very inspirational and a really awesome dude all around. So, if you could please introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about what you're about.
Okay, so yeah, hi, my name is Giovanni Kristen Pope. I am 18 years old and I live in West Lancaster. I was recently elected as an assembly delegate to the 36th Assembly District in the California Democratic Party. Let's see, I serve as a commissioner of social equity for the city of Lancaster. Let's see, and I also serve as the political director of March for Our Lives. So all around activism and politics and actually making change, they are things that I think about very often, live, breathe, talk about, bathe myself in. Just activism and making change. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And yeah, like I said, you're super inspirational. You're only 18 and yet you've done so much already. It's phenomenal.
Thank
So
you.
generally what I like to do is kind of talk about what does activism mean to you? What when you when you wake up in the morning, how do you set about your day as an activist?
Well, I think that activism and what we're now talking about, like which is intersectional activism in our culture, they are, I think, two very different things. So for me as an activist personally, I am able to amplify the issues that I know all about. So for example, LGBTQ plus rights issues, Black rights issues and Black liberation issues, issues relating to young people and students. I'm able to really talk intelligently about those because those are issues that directly affect me. Issues like political infrastructure and building infrastructure and the AV, those are issues that I can kind of speak on because those are my lived experiences. But as an intersectional activist, I think one of the biggest things is having to admit that there are things that you do not know. Like there are just things that you do not know and that you need to talk with other people about. Um, because as an activist, like I think that you can only speak about things that you have a firm understanding on. And if you are not able to speak about those issues intelligibly, then it is your job to really get to the bottom of and understand those issues. Um, so, for example, with a lot of the things that have been happening in the news recently, there are a lot of people that have just been coming at things from extremely different perspectives. Um, and a lot of people haven't taken like the actual chances to inform themselves. And this is not just about one particular issue, but just as it relates to activism as a whole. There are a lot of people that say a lot of things and they're contributing a lot to the noise. But I think it takes a real activist to just like sit down and just be like, actually, before I post about this, let me shut up and let me do my research. This is something that I do very often for me personally. Just because, for example, like on Instagram, like something will happen, I'll see everybody start posting about this one thing, and I'm just like, ooh, okay, I don't know enough about this to even say anything on it.
Right.
So I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to let other people have their space. And when everybody else has finished sharing their story, when people have actually talked about these things, and I feel as though my comments are going to be valuable, that's when I'll speak. Because if my comments are not going to be valuable, it's just white noise. And it's the white noise that you've heard from politicians for decades, not
Yeah.
even for decades, for centuries.
Right.
Um, and so I think that that's like kind of like the biggest thing for me is just like really looking inside all of the problems that we face and saying, okay, I'm going to admit that I don't know something. So let me sit down, shut up, and try to figure out what it is that I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's important because on every issue, there's your knee jerk reaction, but then there's
Hmm.
also on every issue way more nuance than whatever your knee
Exactly.
jerk reaction is, whether it's right, left, black, white, this, that, whatever your position is, there is more nuance at play than you understand. And that's even if you're super intelligent, even if you have researched the issue, there's always going to be an angle that you haven't seen before. So
Exactly.
it's very important to allow people who have done a lot of research or who do know it more in depth than you to speak and to learn from them. It's important to find out more about the issue on your own. And it's important,
Hmm.
even once you've done that, to allow for the possibility that if you're not wrong, you might not have seen something in a certain way. And it's important to be able to constantly grow your opinion and adjust how you see it, because you could always be more right, if you will.
Exactly. Exactly. Like there's always something to learn and to understand. So for example, for myself, like as a democratic socialist, like I do believe in democratic socialist principles. And I will fiercely advocate for those principles whenever I have the opportunity to do so. But at the same
Mm.
time, I also have to recognize that there is a lot about like socialist economics and things of that nature that I just don't know about. And so in order for me to debate people even more intelligently, I need to be sure that I'm constantly doing my research, constantly understanding schools of thoughts and things of that nature. And there are
Right.
people that understand socialist thought far better than I do. Activists here, especially. And so it's just like when we're talking about these things, like exactly to your point, like I can be right, but if there's a way in which I can be more right by just like taking my time to dig deep and to understand things, and to also understand where people are coming from. I think that's part of what makes a good activist. For example, um, earlier today, I was reading an article about Joe Manchin. And
Mm.
one of the things that frustrates me about American politics is that you have all of these people that are supposed to be the leader, but nobody is ever actually the leader. And that's one thing that is distinct about American politics because in other parliamentary countries, for example, the United Kingdom, Canada, you have like one person that is the leader, and then everyone else is subsequently following, which I think is good because it allows you to put a face to a policy or what have you. Um, but our system also works because it allows for people that might disagree with the leader to raise their voices and not be censured, which I
Right.
do think is also incredibly important. But today I was reading an article from Vox and it was talking about Joe Manchin. And there are a lot of reasons in which I could be frustrated by Joe Manchin. As a staunch progressive, there are just a lot of ways in which I've been like, oh, we're advocating for this now.
Yeah.
Kind of like standing in the way of your own party. And that's something that I absolutely do not like. That's something I will say profusely gets on my nerves. And not just with Joe Manchin or Senator Manchin, but with everyone. If your party has advocated for something that you know is right and you are standing in the way of it, or if a group has advocated for something and you know that it is morally right, you know that it makes sense and you are standing in the way of it, I do definitely have a problem with that. But I was reading this article and he was talking about how he would support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act rather than the For the People Act. Now, a lot of the policies that are in the For the People Act make a lot of sense. Just it's everything that we actually need in order to build voting infrastructure in America. Because the fact of the matter is, it is literally stuck in not even the 19th century. Like, honestly, I feel like it's stuck in the 18th century. The way that we have been doing politics in this country has been the same since our country's inception. Um, and it's only gotten a slight spin on it with websites. That said,
Yeah.
but one of the things that stuck out to me when reading this article is that Senator Manchin was like, in order to make sure that people trust all of the reforms that we're coming up with, um, it would make more sense to have sort of a bipartisan bill rather than a Democrat shoving this down your throat bill. And I understand that. I do have to say that that logic does make sense. However, with logic
Good
that
luck.
makes exactly, however, like with logic that makes sense, there's always a counter argument to it. So, for
Right.
example, with this argument, he's saying that people are going to trust this legislation more if it's coming from both parties, which is true. However, we also must confront another truth. Republicans will always be what do you call it, skeptical of Democrats. They will always be skeptical of
Right.
any reform that any Democrat ever comes out with.
Well,
That's
I mean,
just
it's the
true.
definition of conservatism, isn't it?
Exactly.
That your goal is to conserve the status quo. Your goal
Exactly.
is to maintain the structures that currently exist with as little change as possible because you believe in how the system functions as of now.
Presently. Exactly.
So they're never going to really want change.
Exactly.
And, um, and then you have like the political argument of like Mitch McConnell has come out and openly said, we aren't going to support anything that Biden tries to push. It
Right.
doesn't matter if it's good, bad, and different. They did the same thing with Obama. We're just going to be a roadblock. Um,
Exactly.
he held up, Mitch McConnell held up the moniker, the name of being called the Grim Reaper, killing bills in the Senate. So the argument of like, oh, we need to reach across the aisle, like, I agree, it would present a better picture if we had bipartisan support. It would be nicer if we could have a few Republican senators vote for it, but they're not
However,
going to. They just
yeah,
won't. And I mean, we did this with Obamacare.
I
We,
was just about to mention that. Like, I was literally just about to mention that. Like, because they accuse like people that are democratic socialists or socialists of living in this ideological state in which like the things that they are talking about cannot actually become legislation. And I would put to moderates that they're living in that exact same dream state, just reversed. Like, I feel like there are a lot of moderates that have this ideology that if we just reach across the aisle and all this other good stuff, then that's going to be fine. But the thing is, that probably worked maybe 5, 10 years ago. It didn't even work then because that was during the Obama administration. So that didn't even work then. We're talking maybe like the 1900s. But right now, we have to fight extremism, we have to fight nationalism, and those sorts of things. They existed back in those eras that we've talked about, but they have not existed to the degree in which they are open right now.
right.
Um, and so when there are a lot of these politicians that are like, oh, well, we just need to reach across the aisle and everything's going to be fine. It's like while I understand Senator Manchin's logic, it's not applicable to our
To
society
reality.
today because the Democrats are going to pass up their opportunity at power just because they are consistently trying to reach across the aisle. Like, it's May now. We have gone 4 months into the Biden administration. The midterms are going to be here very soon. They have already started. And so I really also do not like the Democrats' fear of governing. Like, I hate that so much. Because it's like they have the opportunity in order to pass meaningful legislation, but one, the infighting, and that's a whole nother issue that we'll get to later. But
Absolutely.
two, it's because they don't want to face like the attack ads. But the fact of the matter is, there are always going to be those attack ads. Like they're always going to exist. The Republicans will always hammer the Democrats about something. And so this fear of governing, I think, is what holds our country back in
And they'll just
so
make it up.
many ways.
They'll,
Exactly.
you could be the most perfect middle of the road candidate ever, and they'll just create something. They'll be like, oh, this candidate murdered a child back in 1995, and there's no evidence, but nobody cares.
Exactly. That's one thing. That's one thing. Like, if I was like, let's say if I was a senator, either in the California Senate or in like the United States Senate, one of the things, like, immediately legislation that I would put forth, and I've thought about this so extensively, is a lot of the like attack ads and a lot of the election information that we have in this country would not be legal in other countries. And there are a lot of people that just do not recognize this. So, for example, Americans in medical commercials, if you go to another country, for example, Australia, Germany, what have you, and you're like, where are your medical commercials? They would look at you absolutely insane because those just do not exist in that country. Medicine is not something that is advertised. It is just like an essential, like you just go and you pick it up. Similar to that in politics, the ads that we have in America, like if you put those ads forward in those countries, your campaign would immediately be suspended and you would have the possibility of going to jail, like being convicted, tried, and going to jail,
Yeah.
because they understand that when you have these people that are undermining the confidence and the efficacy of our elections, or even undermining a specific candidate, that harms the system overall. And that's something that they recognize. And unfortunately, we recognize that, but we do nothing about it. So one of the things, like one of the pieces of legislation that I would put forth immediately, especially in the state of California, it would be like, you have to have like the ads that you're going to try to present, they have to be fact checked. Like they have to be fact checked by like a not bipartisan commission, what have you. Like they would just have to be fact checked. And if like they don't pass it, you can't air it. If it is found that you try to purchase that airtime and air it or put it on social media or YouTube or what have you, either the funds for those donations would be immediately suspended, or that candidate would have to drop out the race if it's an independent or if it's an individual candidate putting forth that messaging, because like we are going to change nothing in our American political system if we don't confront that. I think that one of the reasons that we have such serious issues is because of those ads.
Well, and I mean, not just necessarily the ads, but it's just disinformation
In
as an
general.
entire, it's a weapon. Like they are using false information. I mean, not just even about candidates, but about election times or about like where your polling is. Like they'll target communities and say, "Oh, your local polling place has been closed down. You need to go across town." And then, people go across town and realize their polling place isn't closed down, and now their votes are, have to do the provisional ballot because they're all the way on the other side of town, and it just creates all these problems, and it's a direct target to decrease voters in certain communities. And that's just
Who are
one
majority black and
example.
brown.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Yeah. That's super important to mention.
It's a given.
Yeah. But not a lot of people or not a lot of white people believe that. So it's very important to mention.
Mm-hmm.
But the overall, and see, like another thing is too, in those countries where you can be punished for advertising false information about your opponent or advertising false information, period,
Mm-hmm.
especially as a political candidate, that does not mean that those ads cannot be cutting. Politics is ruthless in these countries. In fact, they hold no punches. Interviewers are way more intense. Um, you know, there's political ads that just tear apart people's policy positions, beliefs, things. Attacks and criticism is good for democracy, but false information corrupts those attacks so that when you make a legitimate attack, nobody's going to believe that legitimate attack because there's no fact checking process to give that any legitimacy.
Exactly, exactly. And it's just so frustrating. Like, it is so incredibly frustrating because I feel like if we didn't have all of these things, then politics just wouldn't exist as we know it. Like, um, and it's just so frustrating um, to have to see. I think one other thing that kind of relates to this is how easily, unfortunately, people are manipulated by rhetoric. Um, like, I'm just going to call it for what it is. Like, I wish that like our school systems, when people are talking about civics and government and when people are talking about elections, like people are teaching students about how to sniff out bullshit rhetoric,
Right.
because I'll see, like, for example, people that are sharing things on social media that I went to high school with, mind you. Like, people that I went to high school with that have possibly even taken AP classes that are saying things that are fundamentally false, like so fundamentally untrue. And it's not even on Facebook because like there's this stereotype that just like misinformation happens just on Facebook. It also happens on Instagram, very much so. And I'll see people just like reposting things on their stories, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And like, I don't want to be like that person to be like, hi, this information is wrong, take it down. But it's like, hi, this information is wrong, take it down. Like,
Right.
but then it's also like, I wish that we had a better system to like sniff these things out in the first place and like make it to where like students are able to like intelligently determine what things are true, what things are false. So, for example, there was a piece of legislation a few months ago that came on the floor of the California Assembly, and it passed. Um, and it was basically talking, one of the roots of the legislation that it was trying to get across was basically about how people that are LGBTQ plus, when they report hate crimes and when they report sexual assaults, how those situations are handled.
Right.
And there were people that were posting on social media, and they were saying that like this is going to make way for rapists and all sort of other good stuff. And I was just like, but have you read this piece of legislation?
I
Like,
remember the pedophilia accusations and all sorts of nonsense. Yeah.
exactly. And it's just like I've read this piece of legislation. Have you? And the answer would definitely be like, probably not, because the other thing, people don't know how to read legislation. When you actually look at legislation, like it, I don't want to say it's kind of simple because a lot of people use convoluted language in legislation. But when you learn to pick apart kind of like the bullshit, it's kind of just like reading like a high school like textbook article. Like that's pretty much all it is. And because that information is accessible to everyone, I really wish that people would honestly just do their research before posting things. And I've fallen prey to this too. For
Yep.
example,
Me too.
there was a suicide prevention hotline that there was like this piece of legislation for suicide prevention hotline that was passed in the United States last year. And it was basically saying that I think um, whenever you text like a certain something, like it's automatically going to give you these resources. And I forget exactly what that piece of legislation is. And it's making me angry that I can't remember. But basically, it was saying that you're going to get these immediate resources whenever you take this action. So either calling a number, texting a number, or whatever. And I put it on my story. But there was a very big piece of information that I did not put on that story, and that that piece of information was that it was going to take 2 years for that piece of legislation to come into effect. So that piece of legislation wouldn't come into effect. I posted it in 2020. It would not come into effect until next year in 2022. And
Right.
people were trying to access this resource and they were like, what is going on? And so I did a little bit more research after I posted, and it had said that this piece of legislation wasn't going to come into effect until 2022. And then I had to go back on social media and say, okay, actually, I do just want to do a quick update because that piece of legislation, the things that you're trying to access, you won't be able to access until next year. And I think that that's really important also as an activist, because I don't think we like to admit when we're wrong about things.
Yes.
That is something that I've seen in this community in the Antelope Valley. That is something that I've seen just in activism in general. So, for example, going on the social media example, when I posted that, I didn't just take that post down because the people that saw that information were still going to be relying on that piece of information until I said otherwise, that this piece of information was inaccurate. So while I still had that post up, until like the similar number of people like engaged with that post, I kept the other post up, and then I kept the new post up that said, okay, well, this piece of information was inaccurate and this is what I left out. Because so often on social media, people just try to delete their mistakes. Like they just try to delete them. And it's like you've already said something, so you need to address the fact that you said something, address what it is that could affect people, make sure that you're also talking about that. Then when you've completely done that step, then take that post down. And that's not what people do. Like that's people almost never do that. And that's one of the things that's so toxic about like misinformation, because like you have those like little pieces of information, then when somebody says them, like you're inclined to believe them without understanding where those things are coming from.
Another important tool that you can use is when you post something that is either completely or partially inaccurate or missing context or whatever correction you need to make. Feel free in the comments of your correction, tag all the people who liked or interacted with the previous material so that they can actually make sure that you can make sure that they get the corrected information. Because without that corrected information, they might not see the second post. And they're just going to go through life thinking the things from your first post.
Exactly.
And so, and also as a side tip, it doesn't hurt your algorithm if you're trying to promote your content either. So it's a win-win to tag these people in any corrections that you make. And also it gives you more legitimacy.
Exactly.
Everybody is so worried about their image and being seen as, oh, I was wrong. And now it looks like I'm wrong. But they don't appreciate the value of taking responsibility for being wrong and fixing it. And how that looks amazing. You're an adult at that point. You are behaving in an adult way when you say to someone like like let's say you take kids in a schoolyard, and a kid gets called a nasty name and then hits the other kid in the face. What does the teacher do? Tells both kids to apologize for what they did and confirm to each other that their actions were wrong. And then both kids tend to respect each other more, and more often than not, they both become friends. That afterwards
definitely happens.
So, I mean, think about that. When you screw up, it's okay. We all do. My God, I've screwed up more than most people, I'm sure, in one way or another. And when it comes up, it just comes to you to say, yes, I did that. What I did was wrong. I've learned from what I did. This is why I did such a thing. This is why I thought such a thing. and now I've corrected that ideology. This is why, my position on X used to be this. I've learned, I've grown, and I'm a better person for it.
Exactly. And like those sorts of things, like the thing that I don't understand, or I do understand, it's just human psychology, but the thing that just like also irks me with that.
Go ahead,
Uh,
continue.
okay, no problem. The thing that also irks me with that is just the fact that like these are things that we do offline already. Like, for example, I was listening to a podcast with my mother the other day, and it was about hydrogen powered cars. I like electric cars. I love Tesla. But they were basically talking about hydrogen cars, and they were talking about how like hydrogen cars are like really popular, and I was like, okay, well that's not true. Like hydrogen cars just like aren't popular because we just don't have the infrastructure, especially in California. Listen to the podcast. There was actually some research that came out, and in places that are like Los Angeles County, like inland Los Angeles County, in places like the San Francisco Bay Area, hydrogen powered cars are actually incredibly popular. And I remember saying to my mom, like, no, hydrogen cars like are not popular at all. Um, and then when I heard that, I was like, ooh, okay, actually, let me backtrack. Whoa, I had inaccurate information. I did not actually look into something before I said that. Let me take that back. And that was the conversation that we had. And I know that she didn't think of me as like a person that's stupid. Like it's just like you didn't have accurate information. And that happens to everyone. That happens to the best of us. And so I wish like we would just get to a place where it's like, we say this, okay, it's wrong. Let's move on. Like,
Well,
because
and
in all due honesty, everybody's not going to remember. Like people have incredibly short-term memories now.
right. And honestly, um, I trust people more when they come out and admit, like if I'm watching somebody like a streamer or somebody on who does videos on YouTube or somebody who makes posts on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever social media, um, when they come out and say, hey, I made a mistake, this is the correction, I then go, oh, okay, well, I know if they're ever wrong again in the future, they'll make that correction and they'll admit it. So that's going to give them more legitimacy to me. So when I hear them the next time, I'll go, okay, I know that they're going to pay more attention because no one likes being wrong. So they're going to be a little bit more thorough now that they've made this mistake. And if they discover that they were wrong, they are comfortable with correcting themselves. So that makes me more comfortable listening to them.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, like we as a society have a tendency to not like to admit like that we're wrong. And we've talked about this, but it's just like if you just get over yourself, like you said, people will respect you so much more. Like similar to like if you're a person that says that you're not like similar to if you're a person that refuses to admit that you make mistakes. Like if you refuse to admit that you make mistakes and every single time you try to, when you make a mistake, just try to turn it on the other person or what have you, people respect you less. That's just how it is. And so with this, like again, people respect you less if you're not willing to admit that you're wrong. Like, but people respect you so much more when you're just like, okay, hi, I fucked up. Let's move on.
Right. I can't remember the quote or who said the quote, but there was a phrase that I really loved is the smartest people in the world are the ones who are willing to admit how dumb they are. And I definitely try to live by that as much as I can. Fully believe that self-deprecating humor is the best humor, and um, absolutely support that. Um, Now, when it comes to addressing some of these things. When it comes to, for example, um, pushing for pushing for facts in advertising or political advertising specifically, or when it comes to pushing for more education on how to spot fake news on social media. Um, what do you think are some of the best ways to go about it, and how would somebody who's watching start, if they agree with us on that issue, how would they start to make those changes in their community?
I believe that one of the first ways in which you tackle every issue is that you just start to talk about it. Like on social media, for example, if you're just on Facebook and you maybe follow some political people, like for example, my Facebook feed is primarily filled up with political people. That is kind of just what I use Facebook for. Instagram, for me, myself, me being a teenager, for Facebook, it's kind of just for work, business, and politics. Um, and so for example, on Facebook, I would just go on and I would say, like, to all of the people that are reading this, do you think that, for example, BS in elections, like, and people not being able to differentiate real news from fake news in elections, do you believe that's a problem? And then people might comment and they might say yes, or they might say, like, okay, well, how would you go about this? And you just say it, like, you just say, like, what you would want to change. Because, like, when I said earlier that I would pass a piece of legislation that blah, 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 ideas, like, all you have to do is come out with an idea. Like, an idea doesn't have to be legislation. Like, you don't have to be like, well, this proposal that I would put forth has to do with this, this, and this. Like, no. Most of the legislation that comes from our assembly, our Senate, and our Congress, all of those things were just ideas. There were ideas that, like, before people talked about, they just didn't even think about. And so the only way in which we're going to ever make transformational change is through the power of ideas. So just sharing your ideas, and maybe they might not be the most thought out ideas. Somebody can help you refine those ideas. Somebody might leave a comment and they might say, well, this solution that you're pushing forth, maybe you should add this to it. Maybe you should add that to it. But I think one of the most important things that I think people need to recognize in terms of this is that you can't stay silent. If you have a great idea, or if you have an idea that you even think is great, share it. Like, I mean, think about it, of course, do your research, of course, because you don't want to sound like a person that doesn't know what they're talking about. But at the same time, I think there's always going to be that fear, that apprehension to say things, and people might not take you seriously. I think that that fear is just always real, always present. Um, but just understanding that ideas are how the world works. Somebody had an idea for a device that would be able to connect all of humanity. And that is why we carry these around in our pockets. Team iPhone for the win. But anywho,
We might have a debate on that one.
I knew that that was going to be something contentious. That's why I said it just had to stir the pot a little bit. But but I mean, the power of ideas, like, they are so groundbreaking. And so I think that there is just so much power in sharing your ideas. For example, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez ran her campaign for Congress in 2018, she had groundbreaking ideas, like, that, in all due honesty, people just had not considered until she said them. So, for example, ending ICE. A lot of people didn't know that ICE was an issue that could be legislated on. They just assumed that that was something that always was and that always will be. But it took for someone's political courage for them to say, well, I believe this, this, and that, and I don't believe that this should be a thing. The power of ideas. And so her ideas spread. Medicare for all, power of ideas, like something very simple, very minute, just Medicare for all, let's make it happen. And as much as I want to say, or as much as I dislike Andrew Yang for a lot of reasons,
Yeah.
a
And
lot
now
of
a lot
reasons,
more. Yeah.
exactly. I do have to say that the power of his idea, which was universal basic income, like there were a lot of people that looked at him like an idiot when he said that, because the
Right.
first thing that they associated with that was welfare. Um, but
Yes.
because of the power of just him putting that idea forth and just saying, no, I am going to stand firmly in this. This is something that I can believe actually, this is something that I believe will actually benefit humanity. I am going to speak forward on this. And so I think that that's just like really impactful, the power of ideas. So I'd say to a person watching this that if you have an idea for how to change your community, don't be silent about it. Share it,
Mm,
spread it. And then if somebody ever like decides to like pick up that idea and not give you credit, then you can also be like, hi, I posted about this on this day, blah, 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 blah. This
right.
was not being talked about before I brought it up. So also just letting people know where your ideas came from. And that's how ideas are elevated to like the state stage, to the national stage, because somebody spoke up about something. And so I think that just in this era of everybody trying to conform to the system, speak up, say
Yeah.
something. It's powerful.
And I think an important aspect to that as well is not necessarily always, have a mobile philosophy when it comes to those ideas. You can always develop it
Mhm.
better, like we were
Exactly.
saying, but stay consistent. If you have an idea that you think is important to change your community because people are being harmed by your idea not existing, you need to continue to push it. Don't give up just because you don't get a lot of likes the first time you post, the second time you post, the 80th, 85th, 375th. I don't know why I like fifths, but go for it, because you never know when you're finally going to convince that person who could really promote your idea. You never know when you're going to finally, maybe that first post planted a seed in your best friend's mind, but they disagreed. And then by the time you get to your 562nd post about that issue, all of a sudden they're going to be like, you know what? He's right. She's right. They're right. We really do need to do this. And boom, now you've got another advocate who's going to then talk about your issue, just as much as you or half as much as you even. And that's going to bring in their friends, their cousin who looks up to them. And
Agreed.
you just don't stop. You can do it. Anyone can do it. They say that one person can't change the world. That's the biggest lie told to the public. One person is what changes the world every time. Now, of course, everyone has people behind them. Everyone develops friends. Everyone develops a movement if they really do
Mhm.
go on to change the world.
Mhm.
Um,
I'm still here. Just give me 1 second.
okay, yeah, you're good. Everyone develops that and has those, great people behind them. I mean, MLK had John Lewis and so many other people who supported him, who worked with him, who did things alongside him that pushed him. You had like Stokely Carmichael, you even had Malcolm X, you had all sorts of people in the civil rights movement. But there is no question that without Martin Luther King, we would not have had the civil rights movement that we look at today. Without his voice and without his commitment, it just wouldn't exist. So, of course, one person can change the world. That's the only way any change ever happens. So,
Mhm.
do it and stick to it. I mean, that's the key. Um, so when it comes to um, going more than that, beyond just talking, because a lot of people will look at you when you start talking about an issue. They'll say, "Okay, you've made all your 300,755 posts. Um, why aren't you walking? Right? Why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you making it happen?" So, how can somebody start walking the walk?
So yeah, I believe that in activism, I think more and more, especially since last year, with the Black Lives Matter movement, you've seen so much performative activism, and it truly gets on my nerves. Because for people that are watching that might not know what performative activism is, it's just what it sounds like. It's activism, but as a performance. So you're performing acts of activism for other people just to make yourself look good. Just so, for example, some people don't call you out on not saying. So, for example, a lot of black followers and you're white and you say, you just don't say like Black Lives Matter for like a week after like everybody's been posting about it. You post about it just so that you don't get called out. That's performative activism because there's no meat, there's no passion there's no substance behind what you're saying. Um, and so I think that especially now, um, there are a lot of people that are activists, but there are also quite a bit more people that are just performative activists that will just say whatever they need to say so that people don't call them out. And so I'd say the main thing with making sure that you're walking the walk, first, I just want people to understand that if you think that performative activism is cute, it's not. Um, there are people that notice. You might think that you're getting away with performative activism, but you're not. People can
Right.
see straight through it. And if you're someone that possibly has a few followers or what have you, people will call you on it. And so I think that it's important for people to realize and recognize that there are a lot of people that might be like, oh my gosh, well, maybe I don't have to say this, or maybe I kind of want to be apolitical or what have you. People take notice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that extends to even myself personally. I know that there are times in which I want to provide a space for people to express their voices on the things that they have direct experience with. Um, and so I know that for a lot of people, it's important to make sure that their voices are being heard before they start to enter the conversation. So I understand that that's important, and that's called being an ally. But there's just a point beyond being an ally when you don't say anything, and it's called being a bystander. And being a bystander means being complicit in all of the things that are unjust right now. Um, so, for example, one of the things that I might reference is that there are a lot of people that are indifferent or apolitical about the Israel-Palestine thing, the Israel-Palestine
Mm.
confrontation, and because they don't want to ruffle feathers, they just
And
choose to.
oh boy, are there feathers to ruffle?
Exactly. But I mean, something as simple as saying like, no one deserves to die over a conflict. Like, that is something basic that people should be saying. And so if you're not saying this, then you are not on the side of both Israel and Palestine
Right.
because you're just indifferent. Um, because I was raised Christian, there's this passage in the Bible, and it talks about the fact that God does not like indifferent Christians, for example. And so there's this passage in the Bible where he's basically saying that I would rather spew you out um, than you be someone that's on the fence about me. Basically, he's saying that, like, I need people that are dedicated and that they're going to believe in me and my works in both like the good and the bad, through all times. And so if you're just one of those people that are bandwagoners, or one of those people that's saying, oh, I believe in this when it looks good for them, God fundamentally detests that. That's what it says in the Bible. And so I think that that's one thing, that is certainly true of today. Like, if you stand on the fence about something, you are on the side of wrong all the way around.
Yeah.
Because at least if you're wrong, and you say something, you complete the fact that you've been misinformed. But if you are just not saying anything entirely because you want to remain apolitical, you are being a bystander and being complicit in those acts of injustice.
Right.
I will say, though, in that same breath, that I know that it's hard for people to talk about things that they have no knowledge on. Because a lot of the things, for example, that happen in foreign countries, it can be hard for people to talk about them because they don't know a tangible way to make a difference. Like, if I see something that's happening on my street, I can speak up and I can say something, and I can say, okay, well, this needs to change, and I can deploy my resources to help change this immediately. But for conflicts that happen in foreign countries, whether it be with Armenia and Azerbaijan, whether it be with Russia and the Baltic region, whether it be with Israel and Palestine, it can be hard. Or, for example, India, not even a conflict with another country, but just a conflict between the people and their government. I know that it can be hard for so many people to talk about those issues because it's something that they cannot directly control. And so, for that, if somebody's watching and that's how they feel, I certainly understand that. But at the end of the day, you just have to say something, because if
And
you
I
just
think
try to, oh,
I'm
go
I'm,
ahead.
I'm going to push back a little bit because I think what you said earlier is that you don't want to say anything if you don't know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
And I think, too, there's sometimes, like on Israel Palestine, and I can speak from my personal opinion because um, I'm a secular individual, but I'm Jewish. Um, my family is Jewish, or half of my family is Jewish, and and at the same time, I believe in the rights of all humans, and I think that we need
Exactly.
we need to protect um, the least of these, to use a biblical reference. And um, I, on one hand, understand the absolute need for the existence of a safe place for Jews. Um, and at the same time, the government of Israel is very fashy. Um, and it's it's hard because you don't want to provide with your voice, especially on that issue, because it's so complex.
Right.
You don't want what you say, because if I go against Israel, for example, and start talking just about the crimes that Israel has committed, and there are many crimes that Israel has committed, um, that provides room in the minds of people who may have similar views on that issue, but may have some other views um, affiliated with that issue. It provides them with some confirmation behind possible anti-Semitic
Anti-Semitism. Yes.
rhetoric. And so
Rhetoric.
I have a
Yes.
real fear of discussing that, and I still do, but I don't as much as, for example, when I advocate for Black Lives Matter, because I feel like there's less conflict, like there's less nuance on both sides there. Um, you know, I don't believe in their racist against white people narrative. So, but there is anti-Semitism, and
Agreed.
so I don't want to feed into anti-Semitism, and then I don't want to, on the opposite side, come out and say I support the existence of Israel, because then there's people who may agree with
Who are going
that
to twist
statement,
your, yeah,
right? Who may agree with that statement and use that as confirmation bias to say, I agree with everything Israel is doing. And then they're promoting apartheid
exactly.
or, policies of oppression. And I don't stand by that either. So sometimes silence or a retraction of your opinion, because especially like on social media, and especially like Twitter, where you only have so many characters,
Mm-hmm.
there's not enough space for the nuance required
Agreed.
for such hot topic issues. And sometimes if you're not ready for that, I think it's okay to kind of pull back a little bit and be like, look, let the people who are
Yeah,
willing to die on their swords go ahead and die on their swords. And at the end of the day, I think the more important thing is, what do you do with your actions?
exactly.
Um,
And
you
also, I
know,
am so sorry if I keep muting myself or if you hear motorcycles constantly revving up in the background.
it's fine. It adds ambiance. It adds ambiance. Don't worry about it. Um, people pay money for city sounds in the background. So
Yes.
consider it as just free, like, free ambiance. Um, so I think what's important is to
There was
highlight
just
the
one thing I
difference.
wanted to touch on. There was just one thing that I wanted to touch on what you said, because there's one part that I 100% wholeheartedly agree with that. And it's sort of that confirmation thing that you were just talking about. So for example, I just want to predicate this by saying I am not trying to compare a very complex issue like Israel-Palestine, Palestinian relations to this issue. But for example, Caitlyn Jenner running for governor.
Mm,
Now,
what a topic. What a segue.
now I have to say that I do actually follow a lot of straight men on social media, and quite a few of those are Republicans, and I mean quite a few. Um, and
Fine.
as much as I have tried to get them off of my social media, they just will not budge. And they're not like toxic people or anything like that, but it's just their views are staunchly different from mine. And one of the things that has stuck out to me is the fact that I fiercely and vehemently dislike Caitlyn Jenner for a lot of reasons. Um, and issues with sexuality and gender identity aside, it could be said that I am more qualified to run for governor than her because I have actually had position in a government office and she has not ever in her life. So, I mean, just coming at it from that perspective. But more importantly than that, when she first announced her candidacy on social media, um, I struggled with talking about it because I didn't want for people to use what I said as ammunition for them to be transphobic. For example, um, I was at a get together with some people very recently, and one of them had said, was talking about Caitlyn Jenner running for governor, but they referred to her as her wrong name, her dead name, and her incorrect pronouns. I vehemently dislike Caitlyn Jenner very, very much. But one of the things that I do not agree with is allowing transphobia to minger into someone's conflicts or confrontations with someone or disagreements about their policies. And so I struggled on social media with criticizing her because I did not want for people to use that as ammunition for them to be transphobic, when in actuality, all I disagree with are her policies. So for example, her saying that she believes that trans women should not compete in women's sports. Well, she competed in a golf tournament as a woman in 2016. And so, for example,
Hypocrisy is great.
exactly. Like, I disagree with that hypocrisy, but I stalled with pointing that out because I didn't want for people to use my rhetoric, my disagreement with her on a policy, with her on something that she said, and use that as justification for them to be like, well, this is why people shouldn't be trans in government. Like, I didn't want for people to have any ammunition whatsoever to be able to say things of that nature. For example, I can't wait until we have a governor that's trans, just not her.
Right.
And so I think that even there's nuance in that. And so when you were talking about like, a lot of times there's not space for that nuance in social media, I definitely agree, because like there might be a person that might just look at like the top of my tweet and I might just be like, okay, well, I don't like Caitlyn Jenner. And if I don't provide context for that, even as a LGBTQ plus person, they might assume that I don't like her because of whatever reason. Another example
Or
that I will brief.
more importantly, not even assume that you don't like her because of her trans status, but say, oh, look, this LGBTQ person or activist doesn't like this slur person, and then
Exactly.
use that to confirm their
As
own trash.
justification.
Right.
And what has also, what I've also like thought about with this, for example, is sort of like the homophobia, transphobia thing. We have a problem in this country with telling people how they should have their identities. We struggle
Wait,
with
we
that
have
as,
a problem in this country? That's
yeah.
anti-American.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I am a patriot through and through. But yeah, we have a significant issue with that. We like to regulate, for example, like if somebody identifies as gay, we like to regulate, how gay are you? Well, are you this amount of gay or this amount of gay? And for people that are trans, it's the exact same thing. We try to regulate, well, are you this way trans or this way trans? Are you passing or not passing? If you're not passing, then you're not a valid trans person.
Mhm.
One of the other more relevant issues that I will talk about with this is, for example, voices are something that are very interesting to me as a person. I like listening to voices. And sometimes, unfortunately, I do judge people or not, whether I like them or not, based on how they sound as an initial reaction. And I
Right.
recognize that that is just my own bias. And then just slowly deprogramming that bias. But for example, whenever I hear Caitlyn Jenner speak, it does grind my gears just a slight bit, just a slight bit.
Oh, I know.
And I recognize that that's my own bias. But if I
Yeah.
were to say that on social media without providing context for why it just gets on my nerves, then someone is going to read that, look at that, and assume that I am trying to either tear her down, like because of her voice, or them using that as confirmation to
To say it's
say,
okay to judge people based on how they sound, especially if they sound trans.
masculine.
Right.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I recognize that that's something that is that's something that I need to talk about and I need to address. Like when you were talking about like kind of what constitutes a good activist earlier, we need to recognize that there are little itty bitty biases that do come into confrontation with the things that we advocate for. So
All the time.
I exactly. And so I, as the activist, always have to be mindful of those things. And so shifting that from, okay, why does her voice grind my gears? And it's not because of how masculine or feminine she sounds. Like, I had to really think about it. And I was just like, why am I struggling with this? And I think that activists especially need to do that quite a bit more often. Like, they just need to actually sit down with themselves. I'm talking about sitting cross-legged, sitting in a dark room, whatever, and sit down with yourself and ask yourself the question, well, why did I react in this way? Why do I believe this certain thing? And so, for example, when I was watching TikTok the other day, and this person was talking about how Miss Jenner had tried to basically like police how trans people could be, like how trans people could identify. And I recognized that the real issue that I had, for example, with the way that she sounded, wasn't her voice innately, because my voice sounds very different than what people would assume is the correct voice for a person that has a mustache. I recognize that. Um, the real issue was the fact that she was trying to regulate how somebody else should have their trans identity when somebody could point out the exact same thing about her. And so when I heard her voice, it wasn't the fact that I heard that she was trans, I heard her hypocrisy.
Right.
And so I think that we really need to, as activists, as people personally, we just need to step outside of ourselves for a second and think about why we have the reactions that we do to things. And I think that that makes us fundamentally so much better activists when we're like, why did I have this knee-jerk reaction to this?
Right. And I think it's important to notice too that this isn't like, if you don't do that, I don't want to cancel you. I don't want to ice you out. I don't want to attack you as a person, because I mean, again, we all make mistakes and we all say things. I say things without, every sensitivity in the world. And, at all times. And even if I've already thought about it, sometimes you're just tired and you make a post and you don't think about how this impacts that. And that's okay. We all do it. It's all right. It's not about attacking anyone. But what it is saying, hey, if you notice that you're doing something, and it doesn't matter what it is, if you notice that you're having a regular reaction to a type of thing, you as a person should try to introspect, should try to look within
Mm-hmm.
yourself and figure out why. Doesn't matter. If it's like you notice that every time you see pink flowers, you take a picture. Maybe if it's like stopping you from doing other things in your day or changes your whole your whole schedule, maybe you should wonder, well, why do I take pictures of pink flowers all the time? And it could be a perfectly reasonable, or it could be a perfectly wonderful aspect of yourself, but boom, just like that, you've learned something.
Right.
So you always, when you notice that you're engaging in a behavior, and then put some emphasis on when you're engaging in a negative or a accusatory behavior towards someone else, and you do it more than once, you do it to a point where people notice, or you do it to a point where you start to notice yourself, take a breath, because obviously it's important enough for you to engage in it.
Right.
So take a breath and think about why. And you'll find that you'll discover a lot of things that you didn't realize when you were engaging in it. And it's helpful, whether you're right, wrong, or some combination, which is often the case. Um, it really is helpful to do some introspection in what you're talking about and to listen to other people's perspectives, because you may say something and have absolutely zero intent of providing a type of negativity. I may call Trump the, what do they call it? The R slur. I am not intending to target anyone who has a mental disability. But I have to think about the impact of somebody who has a mental disability when they see that and they think, oh, now I'm being identified with Trump.
Exactly.
Right. And so, you know, I may have had no intent, and I personally absolutely love interacting with people who have all sorts of disability. I mean, there's some of the most beautiful people on the planet, really and truly. Like, if you haven't had the experience of like hanging out with people that have, for example, like a Down syndrome, I mean, you can't find more beautiful people. It's impossible, and so never would ever even slightly think about harming those people. But what I say still might.
Exactly.
And being willing to listen and not just react, say, no, 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 that's not me. That's not that. I would never do something like that. Okay, consciously, you would never do something like that. But subconsciously, you might. Or impactfully, you still might be doing the negative thing without the intent. And that takes introspection, and that takes listening to people who are telling you. No one's going to tell you that what you're saying is hurting them because they just want to. No one
Right.
likes to admit that they're being hurt by things because that's often a sign of weakness. So if they're telling you, especially if you know them personally, on the internet, people are assholes. But if you know them personally and they're telling you, hey, what you said actually does hurt me a little bit. Like, I know that you're not X, you're not this horrible thing, but there is something from that horrible thing that impacts me when you say those things. Listen, stop, just let them say what they've got to say, because maybe you are missing out. And I think that's super important.
Agreed. Like, we
Um,
just have to step outside ourselves.
yeah,
Continue.
absolutely. So let's talk a bit about what you've been engaging in here locally, and what kind of experiences you've had in your activism. So I know that you have been participating in Cancel the Contract. And I talked to Kimberly Davis about Cancel the Contract previously. But I did see you speak at an event a couple of days ago, and I thought you had a lot of really important context to add to the conversation. So, for anybody who didn't see the previous episode, or for anybody who may want a little bit more clarification, what is Cancel the Contract?
Well, I just want to first acknowledge that a lot of times with movements in general, um, there are a lot of people that are a part of like these movements that try to like comment and say this or this or this. But because I am not the person that came up with this original concept, I can only provide my perspective. And so I
Of
think that's
course,
what's really important.
of course,
But for
absolutely.
me, Cancel the Contract was something that was started by Reform LA Jails that basically tackles a very, very important issue within the Antelope Valley. And it's the fact that we have one of the most diverse populations as a school district in the county of Los Angeles, and we have the highest foster youth population within the state of California. Now, those are two very groundbreaking stats. And so we need to ensure that we have a learning environment for students that is conducive to that. And so, for example, when you have people that might have been placed through rigorous situations at home, and you're placing them in those rigorous situations at school as well, you're not creating an environment that's conducive to learning. You're creating an environment that is conducive to policing, which is very stressful for often many students. And you are creating an environment in which some students may not know how to respond to that. One of the other things is that the Cancel the Contract is an organization that's dedicated to getting police out of high school classrooms and the Antelope Valley Union High School District. And I think that that's important to recognize for not only the reason of just like the specifics, because we want, for example, elementary school and middle school students to be safe, but we also want to recognize this because high school years, the years of senior high school, they are formative for so many students. This is the way in which they are going to shape their perception and their identity of the world by what happens to them in high school. The things that happen in high school are going to stay with students for the rest of their lifetime. And so with this, we need to ensure that we are having public safety and approaches in our classrooms that match that. So for example, we want to make sure that students feel as though they're safe in their classrooms that don't come at the expense of other students who may not act a specific way or may not perform in a classroom in a specific way. This is basically an opportunity to ensure that everyone gets the same access to education. Because what people don't realize is that for communities that are not over-policed and for students that are not over-policed, they are getting one aspect of education. But for a student that is possibly over-policed or over-assumed that they are going to do a specific action, for students that are Black and brown, they're not going to get the same education as their white counterparts because people are constantly, and hold on just a moment, please.
Yep.
Am so sorry. Could I come back in like 2 minutes? I'm getting a phone call.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So while we wait for Giovanni, I think it's really important that we also talk about um, concerns. So what officially, as I understand, cancel the contract is an attempt to remove or find alternatives to police in our schools, especially focused on high schools, because that seems to be a really big problem in our community. So one concern, and I see you're back. So if you want to address this concern, that I've heard people say to me when I talk about this issue, is that we've had, and a lot of people will admit, there is racism within the police department here, and it's a real problem and it needs to be addressed. But at the same time, there is a real issue with threats at our school, especially school shooters.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And people get really scared when you talk about removing police from schools because they feel like, oh no, what if there is a school shooter and we don't have anybody there on campus to be able to respond, which is a legitimate concern. And I have my opinions about that, but how would you respond from your perspective of being pro canceling the contract?
I think that just in general, there are a lot of tactics that are used to incite fear in people whenever people come out with a new idea. I think that that has always been the case. So, for example, with the New Deal, um, people were opposed to that for a lot of different reasons, including the taxes would be raised. For the Green New Deal, that is the same ideology. The taxes will be raised. It doesn't do this. It doesn't do that. It puts people that are currently employed in like the coal and gas industry out of a job, et cetera, et cetera. And those are very real concerns. I will say that those are very real concerns that do need to be confronted. However, I do believe that these sorts of ideas, um, they're usually challenged because people are uncomfortable with the fact that things are currently not working for folks. So, for example, my job is to study gun violence prevention tactics, which include primarily school shootings, because you see that a lot of these incidents happen at schools. But one of the things that I will bring up is the fact that, for example, at one of the most recent school shootings that happened in Idaho last week, um, in that incident, there was a girl and she brought a gun to school and she shot two of her classmates and she shot a custodian. A police officer did not remove a gun from her hand. A police officer did not get her to stop shooting. The police officer didn't arrive on the scene until after the incident had died down, until after the girl was sequestered. The person that sequestered the girl and removed the gun from her hand and prevented her from shooting anyone else was not an officer, it was a teacher. And you have a lot of similar instances like this. And the teacher did not have to get that girl to stop shooting her classmates and stop shooting school staff via using a gun herself. That teacher was just able to hold the student, was able to, I don't want to say tackle, but they were able to restrain that student, hold that student, comfort that student because they were experiencing trauma in that point in time. And they were able to successfully get the girl to stop shooting. And when you have a lot of these people talk about incidents like this in terms of gun violence prevention and in terms of the role that officers play in that, you'll see that a lot of cases of this sort of violence on campus, it's not stopped by people that are sheriffs, by people that are officers, that are people that are employed by a specific contract. It's usually the teachers and security guards. For example, when I was at Highland, we had this security guard. He was incredibly invested in the students. And so whenever something happened, he would be that person to help those students out. And he wasn't a military trained professional. He wasn't a person that had ever been in the police before. He was just a person that was a little bit domineering, but he cared about students. And he wasn't a person that was employed by a contract with our sheriff's department. And because of that, he didn't have access to weapons. All he had was the powers that he held personally, which were his personality, which were his kindness, which were the fact that he cared very much for students. And so
authority as well.
exactly. And because people saw him and because he had a reputation as a person that genuinely cared about students, when he instructed them to do something or when he was like, why'd you do this? They were generally more responsive to that because he was a person that was willing to show investment in those students. The point that we're trying to address with cancel the contract is that these people are not making investments in students. I cannot tell you the last time I have seen a person on any high school campus have a positive conversation with a sheriff's deputy on campus. I just cannot tell you a time of that. I especially cannot tell you a time of that when that person when that sheriff's deputy was interacting with a person of color, with a student of color in a positive way. I just would not be able to tell you that because I genuinely do not remember. That is how few and far between those experiences are. And so while there is an immediate need to ensure that with the threat of radicalization and with the threat of school shootings on campuses, there's also an immediate need to ensure that those situations are being responded to in the right way. And another thing that it's important to bring up is that is a $1.6 million contract. There are teachers that are still on campuses having to say, can you supply this? Can you supply paper, pens, markers for extra credit for students? Because those teachers recognize the fact that they don't have enough resources to supply the students with the education that they need. And so you have a system that is not working, that is currently using $1.6 million, and there are still teachers in classrooms that are still having to ask students for supplies in order to get extra credit so that the teachers don't have to come out of their personal funds. That's
Right.
something the council of contract is trying to address. The fact that you have something that is not working, um, and let's have an opportunity to fix it. Now, if we're talking about, really quickly, I just want to say that if we're talking about their jobs, let's say they were doing their jobs 100% correctly, all of which were amazing human beings, which I don't know is the case. They might be, they might not be. I can't attest to that. But what I can say is that if these people, like if the people that are supporters of law enforcement are concerned about their jobs, let's just remember that this contract is with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. This provision in the budget for these officers and sheriff's deputies on campus, there are about 11 officers. And so those 11 officers, those people can just be reintegrated into Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. If we were on the side of law enforcement, those people wouldn't lose their jobs. They would just be reintegrated back into the system in which they came into the first place. So when we're talking about like this and people are like, oh, well, they're going to lose their jobs, they're going to lose their livelihoods, all they would have to do is go back to the same system that they originated from in the first place. They wouldn't lose their jobs because they are employed by that organization. So that's just one of the things that I want to address. But furthermore, um, I think that one of the things that I really want people to understand is that this is not just a civil rights issue. This is not just a racial rights issue. This is not just a issue of ensuring that students have access to education, no matter what their background is. And I don't want to say just, but it's not just that issue. It's also an issue of taxes. We have to understand that in Los Angeles County, we have taxes, and those taxes are taken out of every single thing that we buy and we purchase in Los Angeles County. And I'm a person that is in favor of taxes because it helps fund our social infrastructure. However, I will say that as a person that does pay taxes, we also need to acknowledge the fact that when you pay taxes, when you pay into the system, if your money is not being spent correctly, then you have a right to say something about it. And so with this $1.6 million is not being spent correctly. It's not being spent in the recognition of the everyday student. And so this is an issue of taxes. This is an issue of money, because
And
if it were anything else,
it seems like it's overall a very inefficient way of having protection for students on campus.
exactly.
You were referring to a security guard who was able to essentially do all of the things that a police officer would be able to do, apart from arresting underage students. Um, that and was able to add a sense of security and safety. And I highly doubt that he cost what, half as much as one of these police officers that we're referring to here. So there's, a question of, is this the most efficient thing for us to be doing? I mean, we could probably hire 2 to 3 or 4 security guards for the same cost as one police officer.
Exactly.
Um, which in theory, if you believe in security and having more eyes and more ears and more people there in that capacity would make your school even more safe.
Exactly.
So there might be things that we're missing out because we're using this money to essentially, add to the coffers of the police department. And, another thing that I want to point out, just as a side note, is that one police officer with a gun or without a gun really doesn't make that much of a difference when it comes to a school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
If you're if there's a cafeteria, like let's take the Columbine shooting, for example.
Mm-hmm.
These kids came into a school cafeteria with, I believe it was automatic weapons. And I think it was a Tech 9 and some other fully auto weapons. You think one police officer with a 9mm handgun is capable of going to war with these people that are armed to the teeth? No.
Right.
And that's not their job, and no one would expect them to.
Mm-hmm.
I did training. I participated in training for a police department when I was in high school. I was in the drama department, and they got all the local drama departments together and put together training exercises for school shootings, like a crazy person stabbing people in a office scenario and other types of scenarios. And they would have actual police officers use their training, and they had airsoft guns.
Mm-hmm.
In none of those scenarios that we practiced as to how to stop a hostage situation, how to end a school shooting, how to stop someone who's stabbing people in an office. Not one was there only one officer coming in to stop that situation. That is not how it's done, because that is irresponsible to the officer's safety. Mm-hmm. That is irresponsible to the people who are under threat. If there is a hostage situation, or if there is some sort of situation where someone who's doing a shooting is antagonized by one officer, and then that officer is put down, they're now way more mad than they were beforehand. And if you think they were doing damage before that officer showed up, once they survive that encounter, now they're emboldened. Now they think, oh, I'm invincible. And now they're going to do 10 times more damage. And, it's just not sensical. One officer, their job is to call backup. Their job is to assess the situation. It's not to go in and use their gun. It's not to go in and use their pepper spray. It's not to go in and use their taser. It is to set a perimeter, make a report, and let their backup, who then shows up from off campus, know what the situation is. All of that can be done by an unarmed security guard, and it would even be better done by 3 or 4 unarmed security guards, which you could afford if you weren't paying for one police officer.
Right.
So if you're interested in security, really start to look into what types of security policies we have and how police officers engage in mass shooting encounters. Because, I would never want one police officer with a 9mm handgun to face down a crazy guy with an AR-15 and 40-round clips and grenades or whatever the hell. It's insane to ask that of any person, let alone a police officer who has not received military training. That's insane. And it's disrespectful to police officers' lives and safety.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, if we want to argue that we are in defense, like, if we want to argue that we support, like, law enforcement officers, like, safety, like, let's put them in situations in which they're actually equipped to handle themselves, in which they are actually equipped to handle the situation at hand, rather than them showing up to a knife or to a gunfight with a knife.
Right. Absolutely. So if people agree with you or agree with us, that our community, especially, but even if they think so about their community, wherever they end up living when they see this, um, what are some good ways to engage with cancel the contract? How could somebody um, contact the organization or participate in an event or promote these ideas?
Well, I think that one of the things that we've talked about again that is so important is the power of individual's voice. Um, and so sorry. I think that that's really, really important. So just raising your voice and just saying, hi, I support this on social media or whatever. I think that that's so impactful. The other thing that I think would be beneficial is just going to cancelthecontract.com and just where it says join us to cancel the contract in the Antelope Valley, just signing up. Like, I know that newsletters and sometimes things of that nature can be annoying. Totally get that, totally understand that. I have put my email forth in the Democratic Party and I have not stopped getting emails since then. But what I will
Mm-hmm.
say is that that provides each person a very unique opportunity to get connected. And so when we have events and when we have things of that nature, they're going to be the first to know about it. And I think that that's one of the things that just activism in general. Um, I think that's one of the reasons that people don't participate in activism, because they don't know that these events are happening in their community. And so
Right.
signing up direct to the source to get those sorts of pieces of information, I think, is just so important. So, I mean, just something as simple as just like signing up on the website, I think is really
Can
important.
you give that website again, please?
Yeah, no problem. It's just cancelthecontract.com.
Okay, perfect. And I'll make sure to put that in the comment section or description as well.
Perfect.
Um, so now I definitely wanted to move into something that you expressed you wanted to talk about, and I think this will be kind of like the last hoorah of this discussion, which has been amazing up until this point. And that is um, division in the Democratic Party locally and nationally, and how that division gets in the way of achieving our goals. Um, when I say division in the party, referring to the Democratic Party, we don't need to worry about the other party dividing. Please, if that is something you're concerned about, it's okay. Division is great. Um, that's how cells continue to grow. They divide, they separate, and become unique individuals. Please continue in that process. But when it comes to the Democratic Party, what does um, what does division do, in your opinion, when it comes? Well, what is division first and foremost?
I think that at the root of it, it's communities that don't support each other, or people or individuals that don't support each other. And I'll provide an example. Um, and the ways in which division is toxic. There are people that I have to work with in the Antelope Valley in politics that I simply do not like or do not agree with.
Mhm.
That's just the reality of it. Their previous actions have rubbed me the wrong way, and that affects how I see them in the future. I am not going to say which individuals those people are because I have
Aw,
respect for the fact that that is a personal disagreement. That is a personal issue that I have
right.
with another person. And so everybody else doesn't need to know that. Everybody else doesn't need to recognize that. Um, but I still have to continue to work with these people or this person because our goals align. Um, and so I think that, quite frankly, um, division in that form of saying specifically, and this is what comes up in the Antelope Valley personally a lot, is I don't like this person, so I am going to detest every single thing that I say about this person or every single thing that they say or come up with, every single initiative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is so toxic. And it's like, grow up. Like, honestly, just please grow up because I understand. I very much understand the fact that you want to be solid in your principles and the things that you stand for and advocate for. I understand that completely. But if there are two individuals that have the same goal, but they don't like each other, and they're both from the Democratic Party, and they both have the same goal, I just vehemently dislike that because it shoots ourselves in the foot. Um, when you're trying to make a change and instead of actually making that change, you just have infighting, that that's just terrible. Like, honestly, like, and we can say that we're no better than the people that aren't making change because of the fact that we're infighting, we're also not making that change. And so whether you're an elected official or whether you're an activist, you have a job and you have a responsibility to help elevate your community. And so when you spend that time arguing with members of your community rather than elevating your community, you're not doing your job effectively. And so, for example, for me personally, because I am politically involved in the Antelope Valley, if I took time out of my day instead of doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing to say, I don't like this person, I don't like that person, that makes me no better than the people that aren't making change. Because instead of devoting the time and resources that I need to be devoting to helping us succeed, I am helping to tear other people down and ourselves down. Um, and that's one of the things that I think that just sometimes people don't recognize. And I'm not even going to speak about this as though I have not personally had to go through this. So, for example, with my campaign to become delegate, there were people that disagreed with me, and they made those disagreements rather known. Um, but I have still supported them just because that is the right thing to do, because we are in this community with the same goal. And so I think that people that don't put those differences aside, or people that hold grudges, I think that that might work in Washington, D.C., but that doesn't work here. That just does not play here at all.
And I think one thing we're not, I'm not, and I'm pretty sure you're not, promoting sacrificing principles.
Exactly.
What we're saying is, and I mean, if you're a progressive, you can look at Bernie Sanders as an example. Um, before before this other senator did some particularly heinous stuff that was involved in the um, January 6th insurrection nonsense. Um, Bernie Sanders worked with Josh Hawley on most issues. He disagreed with this individual 150 million%. Um, and I'm sure in some certain circumstances had a very strong personal animosity towards this person. However, he was able to work with them on putting a bill forward to get to vote on checks for the American people. And on that one issue, they were able to put aside all of their legitimate disagreements and hatreds of each other in order to achieve something for the people that they represent. And those are people from two different parties.
And
So
completely different ideologies. And I mean
completely, yeah, absolute opposites. But on one issue, they managed to come together and do something, and I don't even think that the bill passed, but it changed the conversation about it. And then we ended up getting checks, bigger checks than we got previously. So did it have a positive impact? I would say yes. Another thing we have to think about is the impact of newcomers on newcomers. When somebody joins your organization because they believe in the issue you're fighting for, and then they hear, oh, screw this person.
Oh my
They
gosh.
did X, 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 and Y. And then the other person's like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to work with this person because they're so and so and so and so and so and so. You could not find a faster way of getting people to be like, you know what, I'm just going to stay home.
Right.
And like, it does so much damage. Like, I don't care if you hate somebody. I have some personal animosity and I don't trust certain people in the community. And I wouldn't put my, name, in certain organizations or on certain, I wouldn't endorse certain people, because I disagree with them or because I'm don't think that they're the best person in the long term. But at the end of the day, if they want to achieve something that I want to achieve, I don't care. I'll work with the devil if it means that people are going to get, more access to food, or people are going to get more access to housing, or, any of the things that I truly believe in as a progressive, as a left-wing person, as a human being. I want other humans to do well. So, I don't care if you smacked me yesterday. If you're ready to work on feeding people today, all right. But then as soon as we're done and you want to
we're
talk
going to go
me,
our separate ways.
Yeah, then we might smack each other again. That's fine. That's called being an immature male. And that's okay. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to separate between personal animosity, political disagreements, and our activism, our effectiveness. And again, separate all three of those things, because political disagreements, I may agree with somebody 100% on politics and absolutely hate them.
Oh, 100%.
And I may love
100%.
somebody personally. And disagree with
politics,
every single thing they believe in.
Yes.
So, we have to keep that separated. And both of those things have to have no impact on what we're doing on the ground. Because if you let's say your political disagreement, like let's say you're feeding somebody, a member or group of people who are unhoused, and you're out there doing good works feeding them, and a right-wing Christian fundamentalist is out there doing the same work alongside you, and you start fighting and arguing about politics instead of feeding the people that you're there to feed,
Exactly. That's undermining the work that you're doing.
it's undermining the work that you're doing, and it's making your political ideology look horrible.
Exactly.
And nobody's going to want to then turn to you for advice when it comes to who should I vote for or anything like that. But if you're able to put that aside and work together, then maybe you and that Christian fundamentalist and one or two other friends can all go have a coffee after the work, and then you can argue, because there's a place for everything. There's a place for cooperation, there's a place for argument, and there's a place for active opposition, let's say. And
Yeah.
and you just have to recognize what time, what place those things are acceptable. And especially when you're talking about in the party, I mean, I will say that I am very anti-establishment. And I think if you're getting money from special interests, especially
Oh, yes.
especially like really suspect special interests.
Police unions.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I have a real problem with that, and I have a real problem trusting anything that you're saying. But as long as your actions, as long as you put your money where your mouth is, I'm not going to say anything against you. And that's just maturity, folks.
Right. Oh my gosh. Like a lot of this comes down to what we were talking about earlier. So for example, when you have these sorts of situations in which like people dislike each other for whatever reason, totally understand that. Um, but if someone has been giving somebody else information that is inaccurate, which happens a lot out here. Like somebody says something about somebody else, and then that person's like you said, I'm not going to work with you because this person said this or this person said that, and they don't have the correct information. Then there's this whole incident of two people that, or a group of people or whatever, that could have been working together, but because that information was incorrect from the start, you've completely disrupted the opportunity for a potentially good political relationship, personal relationship, what have you, just because that information was incorrect. Um, and I think that that happens so much out here. But specifically, I think that out here and just in general, people's unwillingness to ask questions really hurts people. Like, if people actually took down the opportunity to say, like before they took any particular action, if they took the opportunity to say, ooh, well, I noticed this, this, and this, or I dislike your stance on this, this, and this, or I heard that this was your stance on this, this, and this. Is this true? Why are you doing this? Et cetera, et cetera. When you ask questions and accuse people later, I feel like that provides like such like a better opportunity for like a personal relationship to be sustained. And if that person just like either doesn't answer your questions, gets really combative or what have you, and just shows that they're completely unwilling to engage with you, that's when you put them on blast. Put them on blast entirely. Like, just
Yeah.
totally.
And I mean, there's a time and a place for criticism.
Exactly.
Like, and, have a debate. Like, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see, like, I'll even host them. If anybody wants to like have a debate between either activists here about any particular drama or hate or policy disagreements, please let me know. I will host the shit out of it. And I'll be impartial as possible. As impartial as possible, because that just seems like a good
right.
Positive outlook. But generally, I mean, man, if we could just all learn this, and again, it's not an attack on any individual, right? Like,
Exactly.
as I have engaged in unhelpful
Same here.
disagreements with people, and man, sometimes I really just like it. It's a vice. It's a thing. Like, you get endorphins when you get in an argument, and
Oh, yes.
sometimes you just can't help it. They just said the wrong thing at the wrong time, and it's like, look, motherfucker. um, but the thing is I'm sure, I don't care how aligned we are. I guarantee you I can find something to argue with anyone about. I could find something that pisses me off about the person I love the most. Trust and believe I can and
Right.
have and probably will in the future. I'm sorry, baby. But the fact is, that doesn't help
It
in
doesn't.
in a lot of circumstances. It does when it comes to figuring out, things like, who is this person? Who you know, who are you? Are you going to represent us well? Can we believe what you say? That's an appropriate place to be like, hey, this person lied about this, 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 and this. And then that person to say, no, I didn't. And here's my
Right.
evidence. That's fair. And especially in a primary, that's what primaries are for. Like,
To weed out all that before the general. Exactly.
right, exactly. And so I'm all for it. I'm not like somebody who's like, oh, let's not, do any infighting. Like, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes we need to do these attacks in order to prove who is the most vulnerable and who is the strongest candidate. Because I tell you what, the other side's not going to hold back at all.
Right.
They're going to find any little thing and make crap up. And how you handle those
Yes.
attacks from the left or from centrists on the left determines how good of a political candidate you're going to be. And that's important for us to know if we're going to pick you to be our representative. But
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
once
But
the general happens, now we either need to get behind and support whoever is the candidate because we're smart, or
right.
we just need to shut up
Yeah,
because now
exactly.
your insults are not helping. They're just going to hurt. And
Exactly. Especially, I will say, especially when you make those insults in front of other people.
right,
Because again, with that whole fueling the fire of somebody else's biases, phobias, whatever, like that's what that does. Like, for example, if I'm saying all of these just like terrible things about a person that I just vehemently disagree with, just because I vehemently disagree with them, and they're in a public forum, for example, community page, what have you, um, and somebody else sees that, that's not coming from the place that I'm coming from, that's not coming from the place as a progressive Democrat that cares about his, her, or their party, and somebody that's a Republican sees that, they're going to use that to justify um, their biases or what have you. They're going to use that as justification. And I think that's what's so dangerous. Like, people making those statements without bearing in mind who's going to see those statements. And also, like you said earlier, when you have people that are just infighting, like when you have two people that are in an argument and they're just yelling at each other, it takes a very brave person to come in between them and say, let's resolve this conflict. Similarly, with activists and volunteers, if you have two activists that are going head to head, if there's just like a volunteer in the background, like, why are they going to want to engage in that conflict? Humans are innately, if they're not the person that's initiating the conflict, humans are innately passive creatures.
Right.
So when you have those sorts of things and when you have people that are just going at each other or what have you, that's going to cause someone to just tune out. Like, it's going to cause them to not want to participate in the future.
And
And
they're
all
not going to
because,
listen to your actual arguments. They're just
exactly.
going to take how they, like, how you present yourself is far more important than whatever it is you're saying. And if you look,
Mhm.
sound, and act like a petulant child, people are going to think you're a petulant child, whether you're right, wrong, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And nobody's going to support you. Nobody wants to be around you if you're going to act like a spoiled little brat.
Exactly.
I mean, and again, I'm not thinking of anybody in particular. I'm just,
Again, yes.
yeah, it's just facts.
And I can't wait. Like, one of the things that I really can't wait for is when we, just as activists in general, start having meetings in person again. Because I know that people are bound to see people that they don't like or disagree with, and you're going to have to be in the same room with each other. Like, I already have to do it all the time. Everybody else just needs to shape up into it and move on. Like, again,
Yeah.
the ideological differences, like in which someone is being fundamentally deceptive, and you can prove, and you can prove that they are being fundamentally deceptive instead of just hurling allegations. If you can prove that they are being fundamentally deceptive, if you are proving that you can't trust them, if you are proving that they are saying one thing and doing another, like, okay, then totally, again, blow their ass up. But if it's just kind of like, oh, I don't agree the approach that you took with this, or I don't appreciate that you associated yourself with this person or what have you, then it's just like, okay. And so, like I said, one of the things that I really can't wait for is when Democrats, just in general, and Democrats in our valley, in North Los Angeles County, in Santa Clarita, and Antelope Valley, they're going to have to get into a room with each other, and they're just going to have to hash it out. Because, like we said, midterms are coming up. There are big things that are coming up, and we cannot constantly be in a place in which we believe it's effective to tear each other down. Because, in real, actual terms, a lot of the times, the things that we think are supposed to generate conflict, the things that we think are worthy of generating conflict, they're not always worthy of that. And I think that for a long time in the Antelope Valley, that's been our knee-jerk reaction, saying that everything is warranting of conflict, everything is warranting of interpersonal battle. When in actuality, yes, some of those things very much are, and we need to call them out, but also some of those things are very much not. And if a person would have just texted somebody else or asked if this was true or that was true and done maybe just a little bit of research first or asked questions first, I think half of the issues, at least half of the issues that we've had here, we would not have.
I personally, this is like something I've learned in my personal life and political interaction. 80% of our problems and our conflict can be resolved between um, either coffee or beer and an order of chili cheese fries. The chili cheese fries are exceptionally important. And you need to also have like vegetarian chili options.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can't
Thank you.
I can't support not having cheese on them though. You need cheese on your chili cheese fries.
As long as there's vegan chili, there shouldn't be any confrontation.
Yeah, you need cheese. I'm sorry.
That's one thing I
Um,
will say. Like, while I am a person that just likes vegan almost everything, I love almond milk. love vegan eggs, love vegan sausage, they need to come out with like an actual good vegan replacement for cheese, because right now it's just not cutting
I've seen so many people that were like, I would be a vegan if it wasn't for cheese.
No, literally.
And I mean, there's so much good cheese. Oh my god, I know I'm white, and so like this is horrible, but I'm fitting into the stereotype, and I love it. Um, so yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think most reasonable people, unless they have this personal conflict, where they just can't let it go, would agree with what we're saying, and then those people are all going to think we're talking about them, which we're not. We're not talking about you. Um, to anyone, we're not talking about you. Relax. Go enjoy a nice pina colada. Um, have the umbrella. Get the umbrella. You need the umbrella, and chill. Just chill. Take a cold shower. Relax. Go outside. Breathe some air.
Yes, some fresh air will do everyone well.
Yes. Please don't be angry. It's literally what we're asking is bring it down. Bring it down and get to work, because you know what? There's people who are forced to be outside right now who don't have air conditioning and it's hot. There's people who are worried about their next meal for their children right now as we speak. There are people who
Are struggling to keep the lights on and trying to figure out whether they pay for, I don't know, medicine, or
right.
pay for rent, or deciding whether if they're sick, they're going to go to work or not, because they possibly can't afford to be sick right now. Unfortunately, even during a global health crisis.
Yeah. And on top of all of that, the climate crisis is coming, and we cannot afford to waste time arguing over who did what to who when. We just can't.
5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago.
Get
Like, oh my goodness.
um so could have had a V8. Now I think we've pretty much addressed that issue, and I think we've done a decent job of just talking about how we can better activate our communities and how we can do better jobs as individuals. Um, Thank you so much for coming on. If you want to talk a little bit after in the back room, we can. And anybody who's watching who enjoyed this conversation, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for watching. And please like, subscribe, share. Everyone who sees this, and as it spreads further and further, it allows me to attract more fantastic activists to this stream. So you get to hear from amazing people on their individual thoughts and how to get real work done. And I just love the opportunity, and I love all these fantastic people that I get to talk to, and I want to do this as much as possible. So please help me, and I hopefully some small part of these conversations will be able to help you. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Giovanni. You're amazing, and yeah, have fun, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me.